Hello everyone, welcome to another VWO webinar. My name is Utkarsh Rai and I take up growth marketing initiatives at VWO. I'll be moderating today's session. For the session, we are excited to host Julian Lee Nestor, who is joining us from Sydney, Australia. Julian is a behavioral scientist with Havis Helia. Havis is a renowned digital marketing agency which has helped thousands of brands to build and adopt data-driven marketing strategies. Joining him for this session, we have Rahul Jain from VWO's product team. We welcome you guys. In this session, we're discussing ways to leverage behavior economics with conversion optimization. Just giving you a brief about today's agenda. Julian will be discussing about different ways of leveraging behavior economics, how behavior economics kind of plays out in the real world. Then we will kind of understand different ways of understanding bias psychology with the ICAR framework, which is kind of prepared by Julian. Then we'll simply jump into understanding how different components of behavior economics kind of works out with different businesses and how you can kind of use or utilize them in terms of optimizing your website, how you can build an environment for conversion. And we'll end it by validating different components of behavior economics with conversion optimization, which would be covered by Rahul. So before we begin this presentation, if you guys have any questions, you can reach out to me on Twitter with today's hashtag #AskVWO. You can also use the GoToWebinar's question widget to ask us anything. We'll take your questions at the end of the session. We are recording this session and we'll share the webinar resources with you over email after the webinar. So let's begin. I would request Julian to take it over from here. Julian, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I should be unmuted and everyone should be able to hear me. And I'll go on the first slide. Okay, so let me, yes, working. So I have 25 minutes. Many thanks everyone for joining. I have 3 parts in the presentation and I spent much more time on the first part because on the first part, I really want to explain to you what is behavioral economics, why you should care, why it's important, why you have results from that. But I really want to convey what are the mechanisms at work behind behavioral economics instead of having a list of tools and principles that you can use, because there's tons of them. And of course, there's no time to go through them all. But if you really understand what's behind, then it's very easy to use those tools that you can find in a lot of places online. So first, just an overview of behavioral economics. It's another approach to understand human behavior. We are focused on the situations where we have to make a decision and where most people don't behave rationally. Rationally here is as understood and defined with classical economics. So people's choices in those situations are influenced by factors which are considered irrational. It's the context around the choice, not the facts, the cold hard facts and rational facts that should drive the decision. So behavioral economics within economics is focused on those situations, and it's drawing as much on psychology and neurosciences as on economics, so it's multidisciplinary. And let me start with just a famous example, but which can illustrate exactly that. So it's coming from Ariely's book, So It's Predictably Irrational, and the data here shown was done by Dan Ariely with MIT students. So it shows here the choice that they faced, and they had to choose a plan, a subscription plan for The Economist. It was actually used in real life by The Economist like 15 years ago. So they had to choose between the first option, web access only, no print, for $59. Then they had the middle option of print access only, no web access, for $125, so more than double. And they had a third option, print and web access, for the same price of $125. So of course, when you make people choose between those 3 plans, most people here, and we should get the data up here, yes, okay, there's some delays, but most people here in that situation are choosing print and web access, the most expensive plan, and not web access only, the vast majority of people. And of course, no one is choosing the middle option. For the same price, you only get the print subscription. So you can wonder, what's the point of having those 3 options instead of having just 2? And that's exactly what they tried to understand. They made other MIT students choose between the first option, web access only, for 59, and print and web, both for 125, and see if the behavior was the same. And of course, if I'm showing that to you, it's not. So we have a reversal of choice just by having the middle option there that no one is going to pick. So rationally, you should only focus on choosing between the first option and the third option on the left. But we reverse completely what you pick. And that's, of course, why they structured those choices based on that. So using those techniques, we can really reverse the choice that most people are making in a situation. So what's going on? It's very important to understand what's going on and what explains that. So our brains is using heuristics and shortcuts to process information and make those decisions very quickly. So it's physiological. The brain is wired that way. It's impossible to change. So our brain is perceiving information, outside information, and processing it using shortcuts just to get a decision very, very fast. It's coming from our evolutionary roots where you had to process information very quickly. It didn't have to be 100% accuracy. 99 was good, but you had to make it really fast or you would just get eaten. As simple as that. So we evolved with this brain structure. It's the same thing, exact same thing with cognitive biases and reasonings and optical illusions, same mechanisms. So our brain is perceiving visual inputs and trying to make sense of it. It's using shortcuts, same shortcuts to do that, process information and visual information. 99% of the time, it's working fine, but it breaks down in specific situations and context, and those are optical illusions. So of course, what you have on screen, a square A and B, you see them as different colors, but it's set up that way. It's an optical illusion. Now I'm going to join those 2 squares with the same color again, and we are breaking the situation. They are the same colors, you see them. But if I'm going back and I'm unlinking them, and you can try that at home with the slides, etc., you see them as different. And even if I'm putting both of them on the screen, so I'm going to have one on the left, the optical illusions, the modified one on the right. If you look at on the left, you cannot see A and B as squares of the same colors. You know it for sure that they're the same colors, but you cannot see them as different as the same one. You can only see them. Your brain is processing information to show that in terms of reasoning as different colors. It's impossible to change. And that's exactly the mechanism in terms of cognitions that we have. So if we go back, let me just take one more quick example and a fun one. So in the environment of today, it's very different than, of course, evolutionary one, but we still have those heuristics. Our brain hasn't evolved since, and it's breaking down in terms of cognition in specific situations. So for example, the endowment effect is very widely known. And let's illustrate this. I'm going to ask you to imagine that you're at home and you have a 2-year-old MacBook Pro. And they've just been updated by Apple for real. So you now have a 2-year-old MacBook Pro, which is 2 generations behind, but it's working well. No problem with it. It's very powerful, so it's a really good machine. But imagine a price at which you would be happy to sell it. So I'm going to give everyone like 5 seconds to imagine a price at which you would be able to sell your 2-year-old MacBook Pro. So just an order of magnitude. So you have a price at which you would be happy to sell it. Now we're going to reverse the situation and imagine that you want to buy the same machine, the exact same one, from a friend who's selling it. And now I want you to imagine a price at which you would be happy to buy that same machine from your friend. I'm going to give 5 seconds again to think about the price you would be happy to buy it from. You know, it's 2-year-old MacBook Pro. Now, as most of you are realizing, probably the price at which you would be happy to sell it is much higher than the price you would be happy to buy it from. Whereas it's the exact same machine, it's the same value, same thing, you should be equally happy to buy it or sell it at the exact same price. But the vast majority of people, nearly 100% of people, attribute more value to the ones that you own from the ones that you want to buy. It's literally impossible to do it otherwise. That's one of the optical illusions in terms of cognition. It's going to work the same each and every time. And it's the same thing as well with the options from The Economist. You know it, you know the data, but if I were to show it, the choices on the left, you're gonna want to buy the most expensive plan. If I were to show you the choices on the right, you're gonna want to buy the cheapest one. And everyone does that, so it's very, very hard not to fall prey to those mechanisms. It's the same thing as with optical illusions. We process information and data in specific ways. It's working, it serves us well 99% of the time, but in some specific ways, it's breaking down, and it can lead us to do specific actions repeatedly. And that's what we want to use in terms of behavioral economics. So the takeaway here is that the context around a choice is much more important than previously thought. That's the whole body of result of work from behavioral economics. It's not just the facts, it's the context around those facts and options. That is really important. And I'm waiting for the slides to catch up. So for testing and personalization, what's important is that those tendencies are at work for most people. The vast majority of people, if we pick one, it's going to work. We can use them, of course, to create tactics that work well. It's just another tool in a toolbox, but it's powerful. So you should really use it, but it's just a tool ultimately in a toolbox. And knowing those principles helps in both understanding the behaviors, the current behaviors, and then trying to find ways to change them. So it helps both to understand for the analysis and to change them. And I'm gonna discuss briefly a framework that I use, that we're using at Havas. It's called the ICAR framework, and it's to understand and change behaviors. I've got just 4 slides on the framework, and I'm gonna skip one of them entirely. I'm gonna be quick to another one, just because I want to concentrate on explaining how to use this framework. You can have a lot more details on it on my website. You can have the link, and it's going to be available in any case after the webinar. So you've got all the details there, but it's important for me to explain how to use it and what are the important points and aspects here. So that's a framework whose goal is to guide for systematic behavior analysis and behavior change planning. So we really want to be systematic. It's kind of a checklist of things to analyze and look for each touch point throughout a customer journey. So it's systematic because we want to be able to check things off to see if they're at play or not, but it's still as simple as possible. And there's basically 3 levels of analysis used. We are looking at the incentives. So for each behavior, it can start with a trigger, it's optional, or it starts with a need. I need to buy an item online on an e-commerce website. I need to buy it. In any case, I have this need, so I will do the behavior of buying it, where that's my choice, but I will have to buy it. It could be a trigger, email marketing, etc. Then the customer is going through the incentives lens, non-monetary and monetary, to shape its behavior and choice. There is a choice architecture lens where we're going to apply behavioral economics techniques there. And then the result is a behavior, an actual one. And then we want to look at repetition. So I'm going to skip that level of analysis for this webinar in the interest of time, but it's very important, especially for e-commerce. We just don't want one-time buyers. We want repeat buyers, and there's a lot that we can do in terms of behavioral economics to increase the amount of repeat buyers there. So the way to use this framework is to map the touch points of the customer journey, and at each of those touch points, go through this framework. Incentives, what are the incentives? The choice architecture, what elements are at play, and repetition. And you progress to the next touch point, and then at the end, you have a map of the touch points with the touch points where things are at play or not at play, and potential ways to change the behavior. So I'm going to spend one slide on incentives, one slide on choice architecture, and skip the slide on repetition, but you will have access to it through the slides of this presentation. So incentives, yes, catching up. Incentives are really the foundations of behavior. Behavioral economics techniques can be used to do a lot of things, but ultimately, you won't be able to reverse or compensate for extremely bad incentives. If you have products that are as good as the competitors, but twice expensive, as those of the competitors, then yes, we can do things through behavioral economics, but ultimately you have really bad incentives. So most of the time for CRO, you cannot really change a lot of the incentives there, especially not on the monetary side. So pricing, etc. Monetary incentives are difficult to change, but we need to map them so that we are aware of it, and we can use behavioral economics most effectively and efficiently when we have mapped those incentives at play. They are there, it's a constraint. Non-monetary ones, we can use them. So for example, examples of non-monetary incentives based on the BJ-Fogg model of behavior would be pleasure and pain, hope and fear, social acceptance or rejection. If buying your product makes people much more happy and boost their ego, yes, then of course that's an incentive, an explicit one. And so it's the role of marketing to amplify all that, but we can use behavioral economics to do it as well. But you need to map out those non-monetary incentives ones, especially the implicit ones. So once you have that, and there's more detail on my website, once you have that, you know what is the incentive structure of the visitor. Then you go through choice architecture, and that's where catching up, that's where behavioral economics techniques should be used. And I should go to the next slide here. So bear with me, I'm controlling another laptop. Okay, perfect. So this other lens in terms of the framework is choice architecture. And I won't go through the details of this lens. Again, there's literally tens of techniques based on behavioral economics that you can use. But what I want to explain is the 5 areas where those techniques are, because that will enable you to go through those 5 areas when you look at your own websites. So the first one is data and information presentation. Each time you present some amount of data or information is a time where behavioral economics are at play, whether you are aware of it or not. You will have some amount of bias just when you design something without any behavioral economics input. It's important to be aware of it. And each time you present any amount of data or information, there's a lot of techniques that you should use and be aware of. It's the same thing for what I'm calling, so it's contextual persuasion, and it's where we check of things. Do you have a default option or not? Is there first choice or not? What is the order of the options on your list? And the order matters a lot, even for economics. There's tons of studies on that. Option structuring. What is the number of options faced by the customer at that stage? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4? Is it bundled or not? Do you have like 3 plans and add-ons that you can put on each plan? So why not bundle it? What's most, interesting for the customer and valuable on your side? We need to test it. And then I'm going to skip choice ergonomics and commitment because it's very specific to the user journeys and the techniques are explained on my website, but not very generic, but it's powerful as well. GPS safety is an example where drivers, when they went near a school or a daycare center, the voice in the GPS switched to one of a kid. So very subtle, but had massive effects on making people slow down when they hear a kid announcing the directions. So that's a quick example. Repetition here, should switch back to that. Repetition is very valuable, but it requires more time to engage with. You can have the slide and the details on my website, but I've left that slide here because it's important for you to read it afterwards. Now, so that's the framework. And again, I'm showing the framework to just show it needs to be detailed, it needs to be systematic, and you have to go for each of the touch points through those steps. Now, what I want to do is to present two examples of how we apply that, and examples that I picked because you should be able to apply them on your own websites and workflows, no matter what. They are very impactful, but they should be easy to apply in your own workflows. So the first one is ease. It's widely underestimated, yet it's very impactful. So if you want to increase the behavior, you make it slightly more easier. If you want to decrease the behavior, like people smoking cigarettes, you're making just a little bit harder, and it will have outsized effects. Examples here under the principles, the bullet point here, helmets and motorbike theft. So in Germany, in the 1960s, I think they changed the law and made it mandatory to ride a motorbike with a helmet. So you had to wear a helmet to ride a motorbike. What they observed a couple of years later is that right at the same time, thefts of motorbike plummeted, like they literally plunged at that date. Why? Because the thieves couldn't be bothered to carry a helmet when they planned to steal a motorbike. That's it, because then they would be arrested for riding the motorbike with no helmets, and then of course for stealing it, but they couldn't be bothered to plan ahead and carry a helmet. Just a little bit harder than literally way less thefts. Apples in school canteens, it's the same. Researchers tried to get the kids to eat more apples. They tried a number of things, didn't work. Then they switched to pre-sliced apples from whole apples, and I think they got plus 68% in terms of consumption of apples. You know, it's not very hard to eat a whole apple, but you pre-slice it and you get plus 68%. So each time you can make something easier, just do it, and be careful of things that you think are easy, but for the users are not. So test ideas based on that. For example, if you're a website, e-commerce, fashion, you simplify the menus, the navigation elements, the categories, etc. You hide as much stuff as you can. Which one to hide? Of course, you need to test it. And if you can use personalization to amplify that, then it's becoming much easier and much more impactful. So there's a lot of points here that you can do, but for example, one that I really like is that if a person is ordering clothes for, let's take the basic situation, and it's just for one person, you know the sizing of that person based on the past orders. Then why not default all the articles to the correct size? Because between brands, etc., it's different, it's going to be different, but you help the customer, you make it easier. It's based on data that you already have, and you make it easier to order. You're going to have more results here and more orders. That's, it's really for sure, nearly. So you can use all those points to personalize based on that. So ease, try to use it. The second principle that is really is powerful, again, not widely used, is concreteness. So each time you can use a concrete element, whether it's data, it's pictures, copy, etc., it's going to be you're going to have more results than with an abstract element. So do it every time. An illustration, that is the ingredient list for Nutella. So it's abstract, it's just a list of ingredients. Now, a consumer group in Germany, they wanted to show people what's really in the Nutella bottle and the product. And they did that ad here. So it's in German, but I think everyone can deduct where is the sugar at the bottom and the palm oil at the top. So of course, it's concrete. You can feel which ad and which presentation is going to have the same impact. I mean, the more impact, and the data is the same here. So how to use it? For example, on corporate websites, you have a recruitment section. You show imagery of the work environment, actual offices with actual employees. No imagery is bad. Imagery which is akin to stock photos, it's perceived as abstract. So it's very simple, but so few do it right. And of course, if we personalize, we can go further. So I'm gonna skip the next slide, which is gonna appear. I've got to delay each time. So, but in a nutshell, is that you need to test. Don't overdo it, because if people feel that they are manipulated, then they react against this manipulation. And even though it's in their best interest to do the behavior, they won't do it. So be careful, test, and go progressively based on that. So I've got 15 seconds left, and it's my last slide. So it's going further. You take action. Ease and concreteness really are two of the underused tools that you can use, and you should be able to use them no matter which type of website or pages and that's my timer. So you should be able to use them no matter what. And then you connect with us at Hava, say hello on LinkedIn. You have all the links here. And I just wanted to leave you with 4 books that are interesting. Some of them are well known. Just one caveat, and I'm ending on that. Thinking Fast and Slow by Danny Kahneman, very good, but ignores the section on priming. It's not being replicated. It has tons of issues now, and he has acknowledged it, but it's still in the book. So that's 4 books for you to go further as well. And I'm turning over the presentation. Back to Utkarsh.
Thanks, Julian. Thanks a lot for sharing your experience here. So,
Thank you.
guys, so far we discussed about various different components of behavior economics. Julian went through to discuss about cognitive biases, where our brains kind of trace shortcuts in terms of making decisions. He kind of introduces the term of nudges in terms of making a comprehensive website experience. He brushed through the choice architecture, where kind of layout, sequences, and placement of different options kind of helps a user or a visitor of your website in terms of taking a decision or taking the next step. So let's try to break each of these components down and kind of understand how you can utilize them to build a environment of conversion on your website. So starting with cognitive bias, I have planned an activity for you guys in terms of understand how cognitive bias work and how we kind of address it and make it a part of your overall website experience. So first, we have this 4-letter word. So I would request all you guys to basically think of which word this could be when maybe we start guessing in terms of what word this could be. It's a 4-letter word. So right now, what you guys can think is that all your brains are kind of going wild in terms of guessing this word. You could have come up with n number of words. One could be you must be thinking of coat. Another would be you must be thinking of the word moat. So as you can see that your thoughts are not kind of streamlined in terms of which word this is. But if I kind of provide you a cue in terms of thinking this word, so maybe I introduce the word fishing, and then if I kind of ask you that which word this could be, then there's a good chance that you guys think of this word as boat, because fishing is kind of linked with boat. Similarly, if I introduce another word, say meat, then there's a good chance that you'll think of this word as goat, because meat is kind of linked uh, with goat. So what you kind of understood so far is that if I present you with cues, your brain kind of start to anticipate or try to connect it with the presented argument, and kind of link it back to the kind of desired action or the desired value which kind of you want to offer to your visitor. So training your visitor kind of helps in addressing the cognitive bias, and kind of helps you in ensuring that visitor takes a particular or a specific kind of action on your website. Let's try to understand that with an example. uh, on your website, if yeah yeah so on your website, if you have a very comprehensive kind of a sign up form, I would request you to break it down into steps, so that the first kind of a cognitive bias which comes into the user's mind would be that the form is too long, and I might not have all the time in the world to kind of fill out all the details. So breaking down into steps kind of ease out or kind of addresses their cognitive bias, and kind of helps in terms of getting little amount of information at a time. So let's say if I'm a user and kind of fills in your first step and came to the second step, I already think that hey, I've already completed the first step, so why not just complete the second step, and the small amount of information which needs to be added, and just let's get over with the process. So there are different ways and situations where a user or a visitor on your website kind of experience cognitive bias. One situation where a user kind of experience a cognitive bias is when there is too much information on your website in terms of them to take an action. This usually happens in the case of mega menus. When people uses mega menus on your website, it has ample amount of links to click on, and there are very little clue available in terms of which where you should lead your visitor to the next step. So it's very important to not provide too much of information to your users, because it kind of confuses them, and that cognitive bias come into play at that moment. Another situation where cognitive bias comes into play is when there's not enough meaning for a user to take an action. This happens when a user is usually comparing your services or your product or different types of things on the website, and which kind of leads them into comparison in terms of whether this is a better product or not, whether it's meaningful for them to take an action at that moment or not. So try to provide that meaning on their website. It could be as small as that if somebody comes into your website by seeing a $35 discount on a particular price, then try to maintain that meaning while at the time of checkout or throughout that visitor's journey on your website, so that he can see that that is the motivation he kind of started with the journey on the website, and kind of go away, or that's the takeaway which that user wanna have. Another situation where cognitive bias still come into play on a website is when the user realizes that he does not have enough time. So this particular example where we're kind of breaking your sign up form into different steps kind of ease out in terms of addressing that cognitive bias, which kind of breaks down into the user perception, thinking that filling up a small step or breaking your sign up process into different steps kind of helps him to save time. And the third form of situation where cognitive bias come to play is where a user think that he might either have some prerequisite level of skill, or might have to use some part of his memory to basically go to the next step. So if taking an example, let's say if you are doing conversion optimization on VWO's website, so you ideally need to know how to create an experiment, how to run a few experiments using the VWO app, then analyzing different form of analytic data. So you can help overcome that cognitive bias by preparing demo videos where a user can kind of go through those demo videos and see that how to prepare an experiment on VWO, or how you can basically analyze different form of data of your experiment. Another way of addressing cognitive bias in such a case is by providing them with examples and DIY do-it-yourself kind of guides, which kind of help the user in terms of not remembering any step or any kind of value. They can simply refer to those collaterals and material and simply perform those actions on the app or on your website. So that's all about cognitive bias. Next we have is the nudge theory. Nudge is basically a positive reinforcement or an indirect way of suggesting things to your visitors or users for them to understand and take a better decision out of it. So basically the idea of nudge is to bring an emotional reaction out of your users, which kind of works as a motivation or an action item for your user to take action. So one example around it is the nudge theory can be broken down into two different ways, and how businesses predominantly uses is to encourage herd behavior. Herd behavior is basically seeing what other people are doing. Let's say if I go to a retail store and I see a lot of people buying a particular flavor of soy milk, and if I also intend of buying soy milk, then there's a good chance that I keep on go there and pick the chocolate flavor if a lot of people are buying the chocolate flavor, seeing that a lot of people are feeding on other people's decision making and research skills, that they must have done some form of research or audit in terms of picking a particular choice, so other people kind of follow that behavior. So taking an example of this website Box, it says that 92% of Fortune 500 companies uses Box. So this kind of encourages other businesses who kind of admire those Fortune 500 companies in terms of choosing Box as a tool for themselves, as they are thinking that those Fortune 500 companies, 92% of them kind of put in some thought and research in terms of choosing Box. So this kind of encourages herd behavior. Another form of nudge could be used in terms of cross-selling and upselling your product. So taking an example of this e-commerce website, which is selling cracker biscuits. So as you can see, it says that if you buy one pack of cracker biscuit, there's going to be no discount. But if you buy more than one pack, maybe two packs or three packs, then maybe you can apply their ongoing offer, which is Spring 15, and get a 15% discount. So these are few ways how you can use different nudges on your website, which can help you improve your conversion rates and build into your overall revenue pipeline. Another component of behavior economics, which businesses usually use on their website, is the choice architecture. The choice architecture is basically sequencing and laying out of the different ranges of choices. Julian kind of covered it extensively in his course of presentation. The choice architecture kind of have 3 to 4 different factors in terms of building a framework. So first is the anchoring, which kind of works as a nudge or the starting point of your user to build a reference point in his mind in terms of taking action. Then comes availability, or in terms of analyzing what is the risk involved in choosing a particular option. Then the representation of different options, like how they are sequenced, and how different user or visitors are kind of taking an action in terms of choosing a particular choice. And then comes the ease part, which Julian kind of covered very extensively, that if you let your user to do very little of the work, and you do the heavy lifting in terms of providing that ease or giving that sense of choosing a product in a easier fashion, then this kind of helps the user in terms of choosing a decision or making a decision. Let's try to understand that by taking an example here. As this Julian discussed, building better healthy eating habits. So if you put your vegetables and your salads and fruits in the beginning of the buffet, then there's a good chance that people will kind of pick those things in the plate, fill up their plates with that, and kind of by the time they'll come to the end of the buffet, they'll see the dessert, and they might come out saying that I'll just take a bite from this pie instead of taking the whole pie. So that's how you kind of encourage the people to build healthier eating habits. Now, putting that into a business context, here's an example of the website Script. So they have 3 different subscription models, and if you can see, all 3 different models is kind of segregated on the time period. So if I break those components of choice architecture and kind of explain that how different things are working here, is you can see the first part where they have kind of highlighted one plan, which is kind of working as an anchor for visitors and users to see that this is like their most popular plan. People are kind of billing on script on a monthly basis and not taking the annual plan. Then similarly, the second piece of information is the availability. They kind of segregated it on the basis of time. So the first pass is kind of is available for 24 hours, all you can access. Then the second pass is invoice monthly, which is a monthly plan. And then there's an annual plan. So basically, which signifies about the availability of each plan. And then comes the ease part where it says that only 60 seconds, it takes only 60 seconds to sign up and you can cancel the plan anytime and there's no commitment involved. So these three components of choice architecture kind of plays out really well in terms of helping your user or visitor or if you're on your website kind of into making a decision or taking an action in terms of proceeding to your checkout or conversion. So next component of behavior economics which we have, which is the risk and loss aversion. Julian kind of covered this up in terms of discussing about the incentive and in the incentives part where he discussed about non-monetary and monetary kind of behaviors. So the concept of risk and loss aversion is basically that the magnitude of pain which comes from a loss is much larger than the magnitude of pleasure we get from a gain. So let's say if I lose $5 in a bet, I want to feel more hurt than I win $5 in a bet. All this happened because of our brain chemistry. Our brain kind of releases multiple hormones. Two of them are dopamine and cortisol. Cortisol is that hormone which kind of helps us in terms of dealing with stress. It kind of helps us in building capacity within ourselves in terms of how we can get over different kind of steps and how we kind of learn from different bad experiences in our life. Whereas dopamine kind of induces positive experiences and positive emotions when we experience wins or maybe kind of learn a few things and get excited about. So putting and understanding how risk and loss aversion kind of works in the real world, we take an example of a mechanism which is called the ultimatum game, where I give you three options. Where the first option says that you can have $100 with 100% certainty. The second option says that you have to bet on 10 different things and only one thing can get you that $500. And the third option says that you might have to bet into 100 things or might be giving you a roulette kind of an experience. And if you can get $1,000 with 1% certainty. So if I ask you guys to pick one option out of these three, I think most of you guys, almost all of them, would want to pick the first option as it's the easiest option. And it's kind of, you guys will want to run away with that $100 note. So what this kind of tells us is that everybody kinds of want to operate in the fourth quadrant, which is basically a low risk and high reward quadrant. So it's essential for businesses to kind of adopt this strategy and kind of fits it into their website's experience and kind of utilize the risk and loss aversion and play around with individuals' brain chemistry in terms of understanding how well they can offer a website experience to them. So taking an example of an e-commerce website, how they can utilize risk and loss aversion. So as you can see, there's an offer which offers an 81% discount on Duracell batteries, and this deal is kind of available for only 24 hours. And so visitors and people who are interested in buying this product would see that say I might have to pay a lot more if I kind of skip this deal. So instead of losing more money in terms of letting in terms of buying more cells, they would definitely fall for this one. Also, you can similarly run more discounts and more sales around by providing expiration dates to coupon codes. And basically what we recently did in our affiliate marketing program is like we kind of run a few campaigns where we've kind of provided coupon codes to affiliates with a 30-day expiration. So when these guys kind of promoted those coupon codes through their different channels, there was a high turnaround when they promoted coupon codes with an expiration date than the coupon code which only offers a fixed amount of discount. So these are few different components of behavior economics which you can utilize on your website and deploy them in terms of improving your conversion rate and build an experience of conversion, build an environment of conversion on the website. So with this, I'll ask Rahul to come to take it over from here. Rahul will be discussing how you can validate these different techniques and components of behavior economics with conversion optimization. Rahul, over to you.
So thanks a lot, Utkarsh and Julian, for sharing such valuable information with all of us. And welcome everyone. So in this sort of segment, I will talk about ways in which you can validate behavioral economics with conversion optimization. So firstly, if I have to broadly classify the ways in which a marketer works is that either they work on persuasion techniques, which we just talked about in this webinar. This includes your choice architecture, cognitive biases, nudge theory, etc. Then there is this experience design sort of technique where a lot of marketers focus on usability and how easy the product is to use. And lastly, there is a scientific method where conversion optimization sits. And really, conversion optimization is actually in the center of all of these. So basically, conversion optimization tells you that, hey, you might have a hypothesis, you might have done a lot of research, but every website is different, the audience is different, and you might have a lot of diversity within your audience. You might have tons and tons of personas sitting in your website who sort of portray different behaviors. So broadly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to take you through a couple of case studies where I'm going to talk about ways in which website tried to apply such methods and they kind of failed. So let's take this first example. So all of us know that building a trust is very important for conversions, and if you have sort of trust fields on your website, you will definitely get success. So a recent case study by ContentWorks showed that their challenger that included 100% privacy, we will never spam you message with the sign up form, lost to the control, and they actually reduced their leads by almost 18.7%. Now, this was a very surprising, especially because privacy messages should ideally build trust with prospects. So apparently, the negative connotation of the word spam reduced sign up because it increased visitor anxiety, then addressed their concern. And yes, it seems true that if you use spam even in the positive context, it might not work for you. So the broad takeaway here is that trust seals might work or might not work for anyone. So let's take an example. If you're visiting a store for shopping, you find a really good ambience, you find really good people welcoming you, and then all of a sudden, we ask you to go through security. You might not like that experience, right? So it depends on your audience, it depends on the context. Sometimes people are actually not thinking about trust, they're not thinking about privacy. But if you show them the same on your face, then it might create a lot of anxiety, which is not good for your audience. So yeah, you should always experiment such things and always build such things if that has a context with your website. So let's take this another example, which I'm sure most of you must have heard, that every call to action button should be about to fold. So that's something that we've all heard a lot of times. And again, in this case study by ContentWorks, what they did was so basically they created two variations where one of their primary CTAs was above the fold and the other one was below the fold. And surprisingly, the variation where the CTA was below the fold got 304% more conversion. Now that's very astounding for all of us, but it worked because of a few reasons. So firstly, let me just tell you about this website. So they offer a subscription where dinner recipes along with their ingredients were delivered to the customer 3 to 5 times per week. So sometimes we tend to forget that there are certain curious customers who would always want to scroll down the page so that they don't miss anything important. Similarly here, that they were offering multiple recipes, and customer might want to scroll down to the bottom of the page to find out what are the most interesting recipes. So it's always not true that people mind scrolling at that much. There are certain sort of theories which says that people do that because of lack of time, limited attention span, but that might not be true for all sort of your customers. So let's quickly jump on to the next uh, case study. So this is a very interesting case study. So even though photos of women along with babies and attractive people sell products more according to some research, removing the photo of a person and changing the CTA led to a 72% higher conversion rate for Felix. Now that is again very surprising, but let's talk more about this. So human brains process visual information extremely fast. While it's debatable exactly how fast, MIT found that we can identify images seen only for 13 milliseconds, and we suggest that we can process visual data 60,000 times faster than the text. Studies on brain damaged patients show that brain has specific pathway that respond to human faces, and some brain research further suggests that newborn processes positive facial expression faster than neutral or negative ones. All of this means that visual information, particularly human faces, are like magnet for our eyes, and it optimizes for success. However, all of this persuasive power can be totally lost if aimed in the wrong direction. When emotions and authenticity are not the important messages, faces can be distracting. Just like in this example, the human photo did not do anything to persuade the visitors to buy, because the core value proposition does not lie in emotion and authenticity here. So removing this sort of human image and adding the core value as an image really increased the 72% conversion. So again, the learning here is that the best practices or certain sort of techniques might work or might not work for you, and the right way to validate it is to experiment. So lastly, this is one of my favorite examples where there is this website called wineexpress.com. It sells wines. So what they did was, all of us know that scarcity always wins. There is loss aversion, there is fear of missing out, and this is a very common technique which most of the businesses use. But what they did was, so they created a variation where they removed this order in the next 3 hours 43 minutes to get 99% shipping. So what they did was, the 99-cent shipping might make people excited, but at the same time, it depends on the kind of business you have. So talking about Wine Express, so what would be a typical buyer? A typical buyer, which is a wine expert, is not a deal hunter. She's likely to respond well against well to aggressive sales incentives. So what we tried to do here is that we removed this sort of urgency or scarcity message, and that increased the conversion rate by 7%. Now this is again very surprising, but like I said, that we should really understand what the buyer is, which in this case is a wine expert who is a sophisticated person who might not like aggressive sales incentives. So again, the learning here is that understand the audience, understand the kind of buyer that you have, and the kind of website and the kind of business that you're selling, and then put such offers and always experiment. So I hope that with these examples you've learned that all of these methods will give you a start, will give you right ways to persuade your customer, but at the same time you need to test them. You need to test them with different audience, and you need to give them the right experience. So I hope you have learned a lot from this webinar, and over to you, Utkarsh.
Thanks, Rahul. So guys, we are opening up our Q&A session now. Just to feed in to start the Q&A session, I'm going to start with my own question, which I can direct directly to Julian. Julian, can you discuss about if there are any backfires of using behavior economics and in related techniques in terms of business?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the main one is that the technique is not working and is working against you. So I actually want to have one example of that I can share. Is that working with a client of us? There was throughout the checkout flow, there was an opportunity to upsell something, and it was the first choice. So at some point within the checkout flow, people were asked to make a choice whether or not to buy that upsell. And when we first started working on that checkout flow and that upsell and focusing on that upsell, we thought, well, there's a lot of potential here because there's a lot of things that we can optimize with that upsell. We can optimize the design, we can optimize the copy. It wasn't really, it was basic. So we thought, it's going to be easy. And so we tested something with really good copy, very good design, etc. We had negative results, and we kept testing, a couple of times. Everything was negative results, even though we were using really the best practices of everything. And so then that's when we started to think about, okay, maybe there's reactance here, because there's no reason otherwise that we should get those negative results. Natural results could be, but negative that could be explained only by that. And so we tested a different way with a design which wasn't as optimized as we had, and then we started to go into the positive result cycle where each time we tested we got really good results, but what we had to do is make this upsell not as good as we wanted it to be. The reason for that, it was because the whole checkout flow was quite basic, and then we had this beautiful section on upsell, which made people much more suspicious about that upsell, even though some of them should buy it. It was good value in any case in their case, but they didn't because it was obvious that we worked on it, we kind of pushed for it, and then it backfired. So by testing a more basic approach in terms of design, we were able to get to the positive results, and then we were able to iterate the cycle with good copy, etc., but also while keeping the design quite basic, in fact. So that was an example of a way to use testing to solve the backfire problem, which was occurring unexpectedly in that case.
Yeah, so you pointed out correctly that maybe A/B testing and using ways of conversion optimization kind of help us in identifying that which kind of behavior economics tactic or component is working for us or not. I think another thing which kind of comes out while I was working in terms of understanding this subject was that your strategies or your messaging should not come out as manipulative, because if people can sense that you're trying to be manipulative or kind of are trying to get your way out of doing by utilizing these tactics, then they kind of get afraid in terms of going to the next step. Another point, I think, if you want to not come out, I mean, get a backfire out of these behavior economics tactics, is to take away your user or a visitor's freedom of taking or picking an option. If you kind of restrict your user in terms of taking away their freedom of picking an option, or setting up your choice architecture in a way that they have left with very limited kind of options, and you kind of come out as manipulated in that sense, then that kind of hurts you and your business in terms of loss of business. Another question which we have from Anmol's side is that which component of behavior economics can businesses readily use on their website? Julian, can you like throw some light on this one? That which are those components of behavior economics which business can readily use? Like, I mean, it's very easy to implement them on website or make them a part of their visitor experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I picked ease and concreteness as illustrations of the framework. There's much more, of course, but those two principles, I think everyone can use them. because it's very difficult to get them wrong when you implement them. So there's less risk of backfire. With those two elements, if you make a behavior that you want to encourage easier, then worst case, in most situations, you will actually not change the level of difficulty. It's going to stay as difficult as before, but it's very rare that if you want to make it easier, you end up making it more difficult. And with concreteness, it's the same, switching from abstract information to the concrete element, especially with pictures, etc. If you add pictures, good pictures to a web page where there was no pictures, it's difficult to really go wrong with that. Of course, you should test that, but there's not a lot of risk. So ease and concreteness, I think, are those elements where it's not hard to implement. And everyone can, I think, find areas on the websites where to implement them. Other techniques like anchoring and loss aversions, etc., are more difficult to work with when you're not in the field of behavioral economics, because there's more risks of things going wrong, of encouraging actually, the opposite behavior of what you want them to do. And it's more difficult to structure in terms of testing, like should you have 4 plans or 5 plans? What are the price points between those 4 plans or 5 plans? If you want to use a decoy plan like the Economist example, what are the specific features and characteristics of this decoy plan? It's not that easy to do, but ease and concreteness, as illustrated in my slides, I think those are elements that everyone can use.
Yeah, so I think another way of which you can readily test on or basically implement few behavior economics techniques on a website is to introduce nudges. Your nudges could be as simple as addressing few of the cognitive biases, which I kind of discussed about, which is where your user might think that it does not have enough time. Maybe you can address that. Maybe where users think that there is too much information on the website. Maybe you can make things simpler for them, or at places where your user think that they might have to use a lot of their memory in terms of taking the next step. So you can help them with examples, DIY guides, or videos. Or lastly, where your user think that there's not enough meaning for them on or to stay or continue with your website experiences, where is the place where you kind of address different doubts, kind of build in comparison, back it with herd behavior or things like that. So these are few ways which you can readily use on your website to leverage behavior economics. So guys, I think I'm done with questions. I don't see a lot of questions coming up from the audience.
But let me just maybe jump 1 minute on what you just said on scarcity, because I think that's one area where it's easy to overdo it and to have the backfiring risks there.
Sure.
So yeah, and it's becoming more and more prevalent. In what I'm seeing is that more and more websites are using it really very, very heavily. And people are becoming suspicious of scarcity messaging, which could be really, they can be well done and they provide a lot of value to the customers in terms of e-commerce stock, etc. level. It's not, the intention is not to manipulate, but it can be perceived much more easily now as manipulative as even 2-3 years ago.
Perfect. With that, I get this session to a wrap. Julian and Rahul, thanks a lot for taking out the time to come here and share your experience with us. Thanks to all the attendees for attending the session. We'll be coming back very soon with another exciting subject from the world of conversion optimization. Till then, keep optimizing.
Many thanks. Bye-bye.